Good morning, everyone. Brett Kavanaugh, speaking from my chambers on what's turning out to be a very interesting Thursday morning. So I'm sitting here with my usual black coffee, no sugar, no cream, just straight caffeine, because I need to be sharp for what I'm about to tell you when my assistant brings me this stack of documents. Justice, she says, the China assessment you requested. Now, let me be clear about something. As a Supreme Court justice, I see cases that never make the headlines. Technology transfer disputes, intellectual property theft, national security reviews of Chinese investments, stuff that would make your head spin. But it wasn't until last weekend, when I had dinner with some folks from different corners of the government, that I realized just how deep this China situation really goes. And folks, it's not what the public thinks it is. The Saturday night reality check. Last Saturday, I'm at this private dinner in Georgetown. Can't tell you who hosted it. Let's just say it's someone who's been in Washington since before the Berlin Wall fell. Around the table, a Pentagon strategic planner, a Fed economist, a tech industry executive, and a couple of intelligence community folks. The conversation starts innocently enough. Wine flowing, good food, the usual Washington small talk. But then someone mentions the latest trade figures with China, and suddenly the whole mood shifts. The Pentagon guy, let's call him Mike, puts down his glass and says, "Brett, you want to know what's really happening? We're not in a trade war with China. We're in a preparation phase for something much bigger." That got my attention real quick. What the numbers actually say. See, here's what most Americans don't understand about the China challenge. It's not about trade deficits or intellectual property theft, though those are symptoms. It's about mathematical inevitability. The Fed economist at dinner, brilliant woman who's been modeling this stuff for years, breaks it down for us. China's economy grows at 5 to 6% annually. Ours grows at 2 to 3%. They've got 1.4 billion people. We've got 330 million. Their industrial capacity is already larger than ours. Their engineering graduates outnumber ours 4 to 1. She pauses, takes a sip of wine, and delivers the kicker. On current trajectories, China's economy will be larger than ours by 2030, not 2040, not 2050, 2030, 6 years from now. The room goes quiet, because everyone at that table knows what that means. The Pentagon's real assessment. Mike starts explaining what I've been seeing hints of in classified Supreme Court briefings. The Pentagon isn't planning for a trade competition with China. They're planning for strategic competition across every domain: economic, technological, military, space, cyber. We ran war games last month, he tells us. Taiwan scenario. You want to know what we learned? China doesn't need to invade Taiwan to win. They just need to blockade it, cut off the shipping lanes, impose an economic quarantine. Taiwan surrenders in 6 months without a shot being fired. But here's the part that really got to me. And there's not a damn thing we can do about it militarily, not without starting World War III. See, the South China Sea isn't the Caribbean. It's not our backyard. China has land-based missiles that can sink any aircraft carrier we send within 1,000 miles of Taiwan. They've got submarines, they've got air defense systems, they've got cyber weapons that can shut down our communications. The military balance in East Asia has shifted, and it's shifted permanently. Silicon Valley's impossible choice. The tech executive at dinner, I can't name the company, but you've definitely heard of it, explains the Silicon Valley dilemma that never makes the news. Every major American tech company depends on China, he says, not just for manufacturing, but for markets. Apple sells more iPhones in China than in America. Tesla's biggest factory is in Shanghai. Google might be banned in China, but they're desperate to get back in. Then he drops this bombshell. The dirty secret is that American tech companies are sharing technology with China voluntarily, not because they're forced to, but because they want access to Chinese markets and Chinese talent. Think about that for a minute. All this talk about protecting American technology from Chinese theft, and meanwhile American companies are handing it over willingly in exchange for market access. But here's where it gets really complicated. The intelligence folks at dinner explain that Chinese tech companies aren't separate from the Chinese government the way American companies are supposed to be separate from ours. When Huawei or ByteDance or Tencent develops new technology, it's automatically available to the Chinese military and intelligence services, one of them explains. There's no separation, so every piece of American technology that gets shared with Chinese partners eventually ends up in the hands of the People's Liberation Army. The Taiwan calculation. Now, about Taiwan, this is where things get really serious, and it's something I've been wrestling with from a constitutional perspective. The Pentagon assessment is crystal clear. China will move on Taiwan within the next 5 to 10 years. Not might move, will move. The only question is timing and method. Xi Jinping has staked his entire political legacy on reunification with Taiwan, Mike explains. He's 71 years old. He's not going to die without accomplishing what he sees as his historical mission. But here's what's keeping defense planners awake at night. China doesn't need to invade Taiwan militarily. They've got other options. Economic strangulation, cyber warfare, disinformation campaigns, blockades disguised as military exercises. They could make Taiwan's position untenable without firing a shot, and there's no clear American response to any of these scenarios. And constitutionally, it's a nightmare. Congress never declared war on China. We have no formal treaty obligation to defend Taiwan. The Taiwan Relations Act is deliberately ambiguous. If China blockades Taiwan, is that an act of war? If we respond militarily, who has the authority to make that decision? The president can't commit American forces to a conflict with a nuclear power without congressional approval. But by the time Congress debates and votes, Taiwan would already be gone. The Federal Reserve's nightmare scenario. The Fed economist drops the economic bombshell that nobody wants to talk about publicly. China holds over $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds, she says. If we impose serious sanctions on China, they can crash the U.S. bond market overnight. Interest rates would spike. The stock market would collapse. The dollar would tank. But it gets worse. China controls the global supply chains for everything from semiconductors to rare earth minerals to pharmaceuticals. They could shut down American manufacturing without firing a shot, she continues. Just cut off the supply of critical materials. Remember what happened during COVID when China briefly restricted medical supply exports? That was nothing compared to what they could do in a real crisis. The Fed has been running models on what happens to the American economy if China decides to weaponize economic interdependence. The results are classified, but I can tell you this, they're not pretty. The technology transfer reality. Here's something I see in Supreme Court cases that most Americans never hear about. The technology transfer isn't just happening through espionage or forced partnerships. A lot of it is happening through perfectly legal channels. Chinese students at American universities, Chinese researchers at American companies, Chinese investors funding American startups, joint ventures between American and Chinese companies, all perfectly legal under current law, and all transferring cutting-edge American technology to China. The intelligence community estimates that China acquires American technology worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually through these legal channels. And there's no easy way to stop it without fundamentally changing how America operates as an open society. The irony, one of the intelligence folks tells us, is that China's authoritarian system gives them advantages in this competition. They can coordinate their entire society toward strategic objectives. We can't do that in a democracy. The real strategic challenge. What became clear during that dinner conversation is that the China challenge isn't really about China. It's about whether the American system, democratic capitalism, can compete with authoritarian state capitalism over the long term. China doesn't have to worry about election cycles, congressional oversight, or public opposition. When they decide to build high-speed rail networks, they build them. When they decide to dominate solar panel manufacturing, they do it. When they decide to become leaders in artificial intelligence, they mobilize their entire educational and industrial system. Meanwhile, America can't even agree on infrastructure spending, let alone a coordinated strategy for technological competition with China. The Chinese think in 25-year plans, the Pentagon planner says. We think in 2-year election cycles. That's not a sustainable competitive position. What Washington really believes. Here's what I learned from that dinner and what I've confirmed through subsequent conversations with people across the government. There's a growing consensus in Washington that conflict with China is inevitable. not necessarily military conflict, though that's possible, but some form of systematic competition that will reshape the global order. The State Department is preparing for a world with two competing blocs, a Chinese-led bloc and an American-led bloc, with every other country forced to choose sides. The Defense Department is redesigning our military for great power competition rather than counterterrorism. The Treasury Department is developing financial weapons to use against China if necessary. The Commerce Department is drawing up plans to decouple American supply chains from China. The Justice Department is preparing for a massive increase in Chinese espionage cases. And the intelligence community is shifting resources from the Middle East to China on a scale not seen since the Soviet Union. The constitutional crisis nobody talks about. As a Supreme Court justice, here's what worries me most. This competition with China is pushing the American system beyond its constitutional limits. The national security state is expanding in ways that would have horrified the Founding Fathers. Surveillance programs, technology controls, restrictions on Chinese investments, limits on academic exchanges, all in the name of competing with China. But the Constitution doesn't give the federal government unlimited power to regulate the economy or restrict individual freedoms just because we're in competition with another country. Where are the constitutional boundaries? Who decides what restrictions are justified? And what happens to American democracy if we decide we need to become more like China to compete with China? The Silicon Valley contradiction. The tech executive at dinner explains something that really bothers me. Silicon Valley companies are caught between American national security requirements and Chinese market opportunities, and they're choosing the market every time. Look at Apple, he says. They comply with Chinese censorship requirements. They store Chinese user data on Chinese servers. They removed VPN apps from the Chinese App Store. They've essentially become a Chinese company when operating in China. But here's the kicker. These same companies have enormous influence over American politics through lobbying, campaign contributions, and the revolving door between Silicon Valley and Washington. So American tech companies are simultaneously helping China build its surveillance state and shaping American policy toward China. Talk about a conflict of interest. What the public doesn't know, during our dinner conversation, it becomes clear that there's a massive gap between what the government knows about China and what the public knows. The intelligence assessments are classified, the military planning is secret, the economic modeling is confidential, the technology transfer data is restricted. The public debate about China is happening with about 10% of the relevant information. The American people have no idea how serious this competition is, one of the intelligence folks says. They think it's about trade and jobs. It's actually about whether America will be the dominant global power in the 21st century or whether China will. But here's the problem. In a democracy, you can't have a long-term strategy without public support. And you can't have public support without public understanding. And you can't have public understanding if all the crucial information is classified. The next 5 years, based on everything I heard that night and everything I've learned since, here's what Washington really expects to happen with China over the next 5 years. China will continue expanding its military presence in the South China Sea until it's essentially a Chinese lake. China will increase pressure on Taiwan through economic and military means, stopping just short of triggering direct American military intervention. China will continue acquiring American technology through legal and illegal means until they achieve parity or superiority in key areas like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biotechnology. China will offer developing countries an alternative to American-led international institutions, gradually building a China-centric global order. And America will respond with increasing economic pressure, military buildup, and restrictions on Chinese access to American technology and markets. The result will be a new Cold War, but with two key differences from the last one. China is economically integrated with America in ways the Soviet Union never was, and China's economy is large enough to offer a real alternative to American leadership. My personal concerns. As I sit here in my Supreme Court chambers, reviewing cases that touch on these issues every day, I have to ask, is America prepared for this competition? Do we have the political will to make the sacrifices necessary to compete with a mobilized authoritarian state? Do we have the constitutional framework to coordinate a whole-of-society response without abandoning democratic principles? Do we have the economic system capable of long-term planning and strategic investment? Do we have the social cohesion necessary to sustain a multi-decade competition? Honestly, I'm not sure, and that uncertainty keeps me awake at night. The uncomfortable truth. Here's the most uncomfortable truth that emerged from that Georgetown dinner. China isn't trying to destroy America or conquer the world. They're trying to restore what they see as China's natural position as the dominant power in East Asia and the most important civilization on Earth. From their perspective, the last 200 years of Western dominance were an historical aberration. They're not revolutionaries trying to overthrow the global order. They're traditionalists trying to restore it. And they might be patient enough, smart enough, and strong enough to succeed. What this means for you. So what does all this mean for regular Americans who are just trying to live their lives? It means the comfortable world we've known since the end of the Cold War, where America was the undisputed global leader, where free trade benefited everyone, where our military supremacy was unquestioned. That world is ending. It doesn't mean war is inevitable, but it does mean competition is inevitable. Economic competition, technological competition, military competition, ideological competition, and it means hard choices ahead about how much surveillance we'll accept in the name of national security, about how much economic pain we'll endure to reduce dependence on China, about how much military spending we'll support to maintain competitive balance, about what kind of country America needs to become to compete with China, looking forward. That Georgetown dinner happened 6 months ago, but the conversation has stayed with me because it crystallized something I'd been sensing in the classified briefings and court cases. We're at an inflection point in American history. The decisions we make over the next 5 years about how to respond to China's rise will determine what kind of country America is for the next 50 years. Will we remain an open, democratic society that leads through example and persuasion, or will we become a security state that competes through control and coercion? Will we find ways to compete with China while preserving what makes America special? Or will we decide that being like China is the price of beating China? These aren't just policy questions. They're constitutional questions, moral questions, questions about who we are as a people. And they're questions we need to start answering honestly with all the information before events start answering them for us. Thanks for listening, folks. Next week, we'll dive into something equally complex: how the dollar's global dominance is under assault, and what that means for every American's financial future. Until then, keep asking the hard questions. Democracy depends on it.